And she said, no, it's explicitly in our bylaws. Only the superintendent and the chair can change the agenda,
Wow.
which is insane.
Hi, everyone. Quick cut in here. We had a small technical issue at the start of today's episode. What you're about to hear is my conversation with David Hoyt. David is the Executive Director of School Boards for Academic Excellence, or SBAE, which is a national partner to the work that we do here at Callan, working with reform-minded school board members. I hope you enjoy listening. So, for our listeners that don't know, tell us a little bit about SBAE's history, the work that y'all do, not only for partner organizations, but for school board members themselves.
So yeah, School Boards for Academic Excellence was started at the beginning of last year, and it was sort of a coalition of people who were working in state level think tanks that noticed that if you look at the resources that are available for state legislators and certainly federal legislators and compare it to what's available for reform-minded school board members, there's really not a lot out there. And so some of these very innovative think tanks, including in the Carolinas, created programs to try to support school board members who are trying to make education a whole lot better than it is right now. And I think, if you look at the statistics, we can all agree there's plenty of room for improvement. And so a few of them got together and started doing this type of work and thought, there ought to be a national organization that helps create these types of groups and then provides supplementary resources for them so that they can do more for the school board members who are trying to improve academic outcomes and parental empowerment. And so that's what we've been doing for the last year. We've got now 50 organizations active in 40 states that are
Wow.
doing this type of work. And they vary in size and sophistication. Not everybody's as far along as Callan, but there's a lot of groups out there doing this kind of work now.
That's incredible. And we, communicate pretty regularly, and we've talked about just sort of the explosion in growth of these partner organizations. And I'd love to know sort of what their aims are, how everyone is working together, how we can really seize this moment right now, I think, where we're at in education and really press forward. And that's one of the advantages, I think, of sort of your position as the leader of this national movement. You have a 10,000-foot view of the education movement and the growth of all of these organizations like Callan across the country. So what does that tell you about the need right now for school board resources and really where we are today?
Yeah, I think the need is tremendous. And it's interesting, the right, broadly speaking, has engaged with school boards and education reform a number of different ways over the last few decades. And I say the right in quotes because SBA does not hold itself out as a conservative or liberal or centrist or any other of the political epithets you can give. We really are just about reforming school board policies and making things better. That said, I mean, if you look at my background, certainly the types of organizations that I've worked for in my background is what you would probably consider to be conservative and libertarian types of organizations. But genuinely speaking, academic improvement does not have a political party, and so we're extremely nonpartisan. But that said, the what we call the reform-minded side of the equation has engaged with school boards and education policy in general in a lot of different ways. Of course, Milton Friedman came out more or less with the concept of school choice, gosh, what, 60 years ago, 50 years ago? And then that really only took off in the last few years, but there hasn't been nearly as much emphasis on the public schools themselves. And I like to look at it as a whole. The education system as a whole includes private schools,
Mm-hmm.
school choice programs, which I know are very relevant in your states. They are where I live here in Florida. But regardless of how many people participate in school choice programs, you're still going to have a huge chunk of the population that remains in public schools. And then we're going to have to answer the question as school choice comes and, for lack of a better term, competes for resources, is the free market incentive structure going to benefit public schools and help them to do things to be more like choice schools?
Mm-hmm.
Or are they going to be left to wither on the vine? And obviously, we want to do the former and not the latter. So it's a very long-winded way of answering your not long-winded question, which is to say that the current iteration of school board reform itself, I think, has focused a lot on the parental rights side of the equation. And of course, in oppositional media, that gets maligned as trying to ban books and bathrooms and things like that. And, there are some really egregious things out there. So there are some books that absolutely need to not be in children's hands. But
Mm-hmm.
part of what we're trying to do is to help school board members to, if that's part of your platform and that's effective for you, that's fantastic. Let's also elevate education and look at, well, what are they actually teaching in the classroom? What's
Right.
actually getting delivered in terms of curriculum? Are they even using high quality instructional materials or the best practices in science of learning? And we find that there's a lot of school board members who want to see that those things are happening, but there's a lot of school districts where it's not happening. And that's where, groups like ours fit in.
Yeah, absolutely. And historically, we've seen a lot of great organizations do work at the state level. State policymakers, legislators really try to provide resources and help on crafting good policies that can impact the entirety of a state. But I think there's also been a dearth historically of organizations that have a more local facing, boots on the ground sort of orientation that are helping local policymakers really assist them in the day to day of education governance. And just piggybacking off of what you said, I mean, that's sort of the ethos, in my opinion, behind Cowan is you've got all these important decision makers. I mean, personally, I think school board members are probably the most consequential policymakers in all of education. And so, in the same way that we've got all these organizations assisting state lawmakers and members of Congress and other policymakers, we need dedicated boots on the ground organizations that are helping them enact policies that can, assist students and really, provide for the betterment of education.
100%. I couldn't possibly agree more. And I've seen an example of this across the country where you'll get a really reform-minded governor who takes on education. They appoint or have elected a really reform-minded state secretary or superintendent of education. And then you have a legislature that passes all these really good things. And then the state school board association cuts the legs out from under it, and then nothing winds up happening. But nobody knows because A, people don't pay that much attention to state level policy. People like you and I do, but most people don't. And then B, no one pays attention to whether or not state level policies are actually being implemented at the school district level. But if you want to change what's going on in classrooms, that is an absolutely necessary step. And yeah, our groups are the only ones that are doing it.
So recently, SBAE had its first policy summit in Orlando, and I am sort of eager to hear how that event went. What did you hope to accomplish? How was it received, and sort of what does it tell you about the sort of areas that you'd hope to invest in the future?
Yeah, it was really well received. It was interesting because we had, especially our state partner groups, have been doing trainings for a long time, before even we have. And so they've brought school board members together for these kinds of things, given them supplementary training to what they're going to get from the legacy state school board associations, which typically are just an exercise in sitting them down, telling them that their goal is to pass a budget, hire a superintendent, and then basically stay in your lane and, don't try to make any waves, don't try to change anything too much.
Mm-hmm.
And ours is oriented obviously very differently from that. So we had 2 hour-long sessions on Robert's Rules of Order and how to use parliamentary procedure to actually get stuff done in a school district, which was very revealing. There was a school board member from a state who said that to our parliamentary procedure guy, well, what if school board members, other than the chairman, are not allowed to amend the agenda? And he says, well, of course you can amend the agenda. What are you talking about? Like all you have to do is, motion in a second. You have to approve the agenda, at the beginning of the meeting, like that's your opportunity. And she said, no, it's explicitly in our bylaws. Only the superintendent and the chair can change the agenda,
Wow.
which is insane. But that's, the thing is, so many school board members are, they're not paid, they're not full time like a lot of legislators are.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't, and a lot of times, it's Mr. Smith goes to Washington. They're just somebody from the community who wants to get good stuff done. And I think a lot of them don't think they're going to meet the kind of headwinds they meet from the powers that be within their district. And then stuff like that is what happens. So it's a very different type of training than what they get from the State School Board Association. And it was interesting because, our state partners have been doing trainings for a while. What we haven't done in the past with SBAE was putting the leaders of organizations together with school board members from multiple states all together in one room. And it was interesting because it gave everybody an opportunity to really think through problems and map out courses of action,
Mm-hmm.
leaving that room. So that was all very interesting.
Yeah, and so you had the opportunity to host school board members from all different areas of the country that are experiencing different issues, different educational issues, different political climates. Were there any common themes that you're hearing from school board members, sort of regardless of where they're from, sort of these key issues in education that a lot of different people are seeing?
Yeah, there's a number of them. I think one of the main ones is a lack of accountability and just, how do you hold your administrative team accountable? Because I've seen this with boards that I'm on where everybody kind of wants to pretend like we're all rowing in the same direction. They want to pretend like we're all friends. And if you're the one nay vote on something, it's like, oh my gosh, what's wrong with this guy? Why can't he just go along with it? And if your school district is high performing and you're at 90+% grade level in graduation, then that's great. In most cases, that's not how it is. And so holding the administration accountable to effective goals that, are SMART goals, like the acronym SMART, specific, measurable, achievable, et cetera, is not that easy because that's not how things are done in most school districts. Accountability is in name only in most places. And so one of the lectures that we've given is how to effectively hold administrators accountable and how to set the right goals because you can't have unrealistic goals. You can't have unspecific goals. But if you have specific realistic goals and everybody agrees this is what we should be moving toward,
Yeah.
then you're in a place where you can actually hold the superintendent accountable.
And then the other component of that is once you hire the superintendent, measuring their progress and making sure that they have what they need to stay on track. And I know there's been lots of literature written about this. I know AJ Crable's, great on their behalf, talks about, 50% of your time as a school board should be tracking outcomes and working with your superintendent to make sure that your district is on the right track for student achievement. And so it's, I think it's just great to see these conversations are finally being had about what are the actual core responsibilities of school board service. And it's not to say that these other elements from bus routes to capital projects to those other things aren't aspects of governance as well. But frankly, there's only so much time in the day. There's only so many school board meetings in a year. If we use our time effectively and wisely, I think that will make everything better and more prosperous.
Oh, 100%. No, that couldn't be more true. And, even some of the things that aren't directly obviously related to academic achievement, like budgetary reform, are things that you can orient towards academic achievement. So when you're talking about budget, one of the reasons why you might want to increase efficiency in your district is to increase the percentage of instructional spending. And that's something that will increase your academic outcomes. And then other stuff, yeah, I'd agree with you. Like, if it's not going to have any effect on student outcomes, maybe it's not the most important thing to spend a lot of time on.
I wanted to ask you about this. So some of our colleagues, Dave Trabert and Melanie Strom out of Kansas, recently wrote a book, 8 Things to Know About Running for School Board. And I think this question is always relevant. But really, what are some of the key things that people should know about running for school board at a high level?
Well, yeah, I think one thing is it's hard. And you're taking on a public service. But the most important thing I think is that as long as your North Star is academic achievement, everything else kind of trickles down from that. And so the way that translates into actual practices is like if you're having a conversation with a fellow board member and you're saying, hey, I think we need to reform, or, we need to get an audit done of our curriculum. I'm not 100% clear. We're not getting the information we need. And I'd like to know if our curriculum has high quality instructional materials according to objective assessment data. And then somebody says, yeah, well, that's really not our role as school board members. We really need to let the superintendent handle that kind of thing. There's two different ways you can handle that objection. One way is to say, yeah, well, this is what I want to do, or like, I think it's important, whatever it is that's on your plate. Or you can say, well, okay, but if we don't look into this, how does that help kids learn better? How do we know that we're helping kids learn better if we don't do X? And it is a governance and oversight thing. So it's also like there are specific ways of overcoming that objection. But one of the things that I think 8 Things the book does extremely well is every single reform area and every topic of conversation in there is oriented towards how does this affect student achievement? And there's a whole chapter on messaging that you referenced. Melanie Sturm, I believe, was the co-author on, and it all starts with that. And that goes to a lot of divisive issues, like during the Biden administration, they passed these new Title IX rules that got a huge amount of dust kicked up. And at the end of the day, even that can be talked about in terms of how does this benefit or not student achievement. And I think the book does a great job of that.
And finally, I just wanted to give you the opportunity to talk about any stories of impact that you've seen sort of working with different partner organizations, working with school board members directly? Anything that came out of the policy summit that gives you excitement about the future?
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's interesting. I don't always recommend firing superintendents, but there's certainly cases where that is what needs to happen. And there was, after it wasn't at this one, but at a previous parliamentary procedure training, we got an email back from someone and said they immediately had fired their superintendent. And I take it as an article of faith that that was a positive thing. So anyway, but those kinds of large scale personnel changes can make a real difference. So that's one thing. I think one of the most important things is, like we were talking about before with the academic goal setting. We have people that we can provide or bring in or otherwise recommend, and following our presentations on setting goals and holding administrators accountable to those goals, we've had school districts follow up with us and say, that was really good. Can you come in and actually advise me, board meeting to board meeting, on how we can implement a program like that in my district? And that's the kind of thing I think, over time you'll get to see reading scores improve and math scores improve and stuff like that.
Any closing thoughts that you'd like to offer here, and where can people learn more about SBAE and get involved?
Well, thank you. Yeah, I think our website and our social media are really good places. We have a newsletter that people can sign up for, and on Twitter and Facebook, we're just at SBAE Network, and we try to post at least quasi-relevant and interesting content a couple times a day. So that's a good place to follow us. And as far as a closing thought, I would just say to anybody who works in education reform, whether it's as a school board member or even just a concerned parent, which I mean, that's how I got involved, was being a concerned parent, more or less, that I think there's nothing more important than education reform for the future of our country. And that was why I got involved in public policy almost 20 years ago, was that, we're trying to make the world a better place. And, reasonable people can disagree about what exact policies make the world a better place. But education is one of those places where there are solutions that are ready at hand. And our work of helping school board members to implement those solutions has a very real effect in making the future of the country better than the past was. And what kids learn for 13 years of their lives for 6 to 8 hours a day is by far the most important thing in determining the future of our, I won't say democracy, I'll say our representative republic. So just congratulate anybody who's working with us on this stuff.
Yeah, well said. Well, David, thank you so much for speaking with me today. It's been a pleasure having you on the show. Thank you all so much for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.